The deadly E. coli outbreak in Germany has claimed nearly 40 lives to date, sickening more than 3,400 people. And the outbreak has already been called the world's largest. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says that infections are spreading. They're spreading to European countries as well as Canada and even the United States. But unfortunately, the source of the outbreak has actually baffled scientists. They're still trying to figure out the evolution of this deadly strain. It's very different from other E. coli strains. And moreover, the uncertainty has actually led to a lot of questions about whether, who knows, maybe foul play could be at hand here. Some have even suggested that this super resistant strain of E. coli could have been engineered in a lab. Now, one of the voices ringing the alarm over this is Mike Adams, aka the Health Ranger. He's also the editor-in-chief of naturalnews.com, and he joins us now to give his take on this deadly outbreak. Mike, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with us. For those of us not familiar with this issue, walk us through what makes this specific strain so scary. Why should we be concerned?
Sure, and thanks for having me on. Great to join you. Well, this strain called O104, if you look at it genetically, it reveals how it came about. And you have to come to the conclusion that this strain was exposed to 8 different classes of antibiotics in its creation. Now, whether that happened...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Before we get to that, I mean, explain to us exactly, when you say the strain is resistant, what does that mean for folks who aren't really familiar with all this?
Sure. Resistant means that if you are infected with this strain and you go to the hospital, where normally they would give you an antibiotic that cures you of that strain, in this case, that strain is completely resistant, rendering that antibiotic completely useless. And that's why so many people have died from this. And I think right now up to 900 people are facing kidney failure because of these infections, and the doctors can't do much for them because the antibiotics are useless.
So basically no cure for this. And I read in one report there's actually even a little bit of a Black Plague strain in this.
Well, if you look at the genetic code, there are a lot of hints of different things from the history of infectious disease that seem to have made their way into this strain. And that's one of the suspicious elements of this. You asked the question in the intro, where does this come from? How did it come to be? This does not happen in the wild, where you have a strain that's resistant to 8 major classes of antibiotics. This looks like, genetically, it looks like it had to be engineered, maybe by a terrorist organization, or maybe, who knows, by a rogue agency in a government or a pharmaceutical company that wanted to sell some other cure to it. We don't know the answers to that yet, but it is wise to start asking questions about where it really came from.
But what about, I mean, we know that in our society we tend to over-medicate. There's more and more increasing use of antibiotics in humans, in animals, in animal feed. I mean, couldn't it be that somehow this all got passed down through, I don't know, cow poop?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that does happen when you find strains that are resistant to, let's say, 1 or 2 major antibiotics. That does happen in the wild, and it does happen from the abuse of antibiotics in animals. And when that animal-based fertilizer is used on food crops, you do see that resistance. But we've never seen 8 different classes of antibiotics resistant all at the same time. And that's what's raising suspicion that this had to have been engineered by someone and then either intentionally introduced into the food supply, or perhaps something escaped from a bioweapons laboratory and somehow made it into the food supply accidentally. Those are the 2 possibilities that we're looking at now, and it's a mystery. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but it's definitely not just a random accident in nature.
Well, and definitely terrifying. But if we take away, if we go along with this theory that you just proposed, but take away the terrorist threat, right? If there was perhaps, I don't know, some sort of foul play involved by companies or I don't know who, what would be the benefit of that? I mean, doesn't this harm everyone in the society as a whole? Who could possibly stand to benefit from this kind of
Well,
outbreak?
Throughout world history, that's a great question, by the way. There are many examples of both governments and corporations unleashing problems so that they could offer the solution. It's the classic problem, reaction, solution story, and it's been used to justify wars in the Middle East, for example. You create the problem, and then you sell the solution. So this could be an agenda, potentially, to have more food regulations and crack down on small farms. You notice that in the reaction to this, they have virtually destroyed small organic vegetable farmers in Spain. I mean, they've destroyed the economy there. Literally thousands of tons of vegetables that are perfectly safe were just wasted over this because they said, oh, don't eat cucumbers, don't eat tomatoes, don't eat lettuce. Turns out those were all false alarms. but they had an economic impact that might be considered an act of economic warfare against Spain's farmers.
But with all due respect, I mean, our Congress can barely get together and agree on what to name the next post office, let alone wage some sort of covert food warfare campaign. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that a government that's so kind of in disarray could really get its stuff together to do something that outrageous.
Well, there are elements that know what they're doing, and this came out in WikiLeaks not long ago that the U.S. was pushing GMOs very aggressively throughout the EU, including Spain, and Spain resisted that effort. And as the WikiLeaks website revealed, the U.S. had determined that it was going to retaliate against Spain for resisting GMOs. So there are elements within the government that do have an agenda, and sometimes they pull it off.
All right. Well, Mike, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I hope that you're wrong. Obviously, we don't have a lot of answers here, but scary stuff nonetheless. I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. That was Mike Adams,
great to join you.
Health Ranger and Editor-in-Chief of naturalnews.com.